In the entertainment industry, it's not uncommon for someone to dislike a previous work of theirs, whether it's because their vision was compromised to appease other people, or because they associate it with a bad time in their life. Artists distancing themselves from some of their projects is something we hear a lot of from directors, actors, and for the topic of today's video, singers. Let's take a look at some albums that are, or at one point were, disliked by their respective artists. Mandy Moore, So Real, and Mandy Moore. Mandy's most popular albums also happen to be her least favorites. Her debut, So Real, and its reissue, I Wanna Be With You, were about the most saccharine bubblegum pop albums released at the time. This was due to her label wanting to market her as a younger Britney Spears of sorts, capitalizing on the teen pop sound she helped popularize, while also appealing to children. The result was a very hammy, gloriously cheesy record, one that Mandy herself was not fond of, saying in a 2002 interview about her next album that she was tired of the teen pop sound and wanted to do something different. Her second album, Mandy Moore, was definitely a bit more mature than her first, though it was still notably more juvenile than the records from Britney, Jessica Simpson, and Christina Aguilera at the time. During a 2006 interview for her third album, Coverage, she absolutely tore her early work to shreds, saying anyone who bought them deserve a refund and that they should be burned. She was not missing these eras like Candy. Oh no, she wasn't. While she softened up to these albums in recent years, even performing Candy during some of her live shows, it's obvious she finds them cringeworthy. Kind of like looking back on old Facebook posts you made when you were 12. As much as I love her early work, I can understand why she wouldn't. Imagine singing songs like Lock Me in Your Heart and Everything My Heart Desires as a 15 or 16-year-old, and having it sold for the whole world to listen to. Being that age sucks enough when you aren't famous, but having such an awkward time essentially being broadcast to millions of people cannot be easy. I don't blame her at all for not liking her early stuff, but I'm gonna continue to enjoy it for all of its sugar-coated sweetness. Selena Gomez, Stars Dance. Okay, this one might not be an outright dislike as much as it is indifference. Stars Dance was Selena's first solo album, though you wouldn't guess that going off her statements for her following albums, with her seemingly considering Revival to be her solo debut, with Rare being her second, and her next album being teased as SG3. Even though she hasn't outright stated that she dislikes Stars Dance, it's clear she doesn't have as strong of a connection to it than her following records, which is most likely due to her having little control over it. Stars Dance was her final album released under Hollywood Records, if we're not counting her compilation album For You. And for those who don't know, Hollywood Records is the label behind Disney Channel acts, such as Miley Cyrus and Demi Lovato, back when they were making music for kids and teens. As a Disney-owned label, the artists at Hollywood Records typically have a family-friendly image, and their music doesn't really explore super heavy topics. The label's a bit past their heyday now, with no artist nearly as huge as the late 2000s Disney Channel acts, but back then they had a chokehold on kids and teens across the country, with acts like the Jonas Brothers and Hannah Montana being legitimately massive. Selena actually released 4 albums with the label, 3 of which were with her band, The Scene, and Stars Dance, which did mark a bit of an image change for her, as it was a comparatively more mature record than her previous 3, but still pretty kid-friendly. Stars Dance is an EDM record that admittedly contains some personal songwriting, specifically on the track Love Will Remember, which is believed to be about her ex-boyfriend Justin Bieber, but overall, it's nothing anyone else couldn't have sang. When promoting Revival, she stated that she had way more control over that record, and evidently, this is probably why she considers it to be her actual solo debut, since Stars Dance lacked the personal touch she wanted in her music. I can understand why she feels like Revival was the first album that truly represented her as an artist, but it is kind of funny that she essentially ignores Stars Dance and confuses everybody with each new album cycle when she says she's on her second or third album, when in reality she's had 6 if we're including her output with The Scene. We might not know if she outright hates or just moderately dislikes Stars Dance, but it's clear she doesn't have the same respect for it as her following works. Kylie Minogue, Impossible Princess. Released in 1997, Impossible Princess has developed a reputation as Kylie's quote-unquote flop era, though in reality, it really wasn't the huge disaster some have made it out to be. It had several top 30 hits in the UK and Australia, and peaked within the top 5 albums of both countries. However, it did vastly underperform when compared to her previous records, selling only a fraction of expected sales figures. While commercially it didn't live up to expectations, the real damage this did to Kylie's career at the time was to her public image. In the mid-90s, Kylie had switched from her previous label, PWL, to go to Deconstruction Records, which is known for housing more underground and experimental artists. The first record she released with the label was 1994's Kylie Minogue, which was far more mature than her previous bubblegum pop output, and began a stylistic era in her career which fans and critics have dubbed Indie Kylie. While it was a success, especially with the lead single Confide in Me, Kylie was gonna go in an even more experimental direction for her next record, incorporating genres such as trip-hop, rock, country, and electronica. Unfortunately, the album suffered from numerous delays, causing it to be released 3 years after Kylie Minogue. This long gap could possibly explain why the general public was less receptive to the album, since it represented a totally different Kylie than the one they'd known before. Had she come back with something aesthetically and sonically less out there, it may have been received more warmly, though that wasn't Kylie's vision for this album. She wanted to make something deeper and more thought-provoking than ever before, that covered topics such as self-hatred, self-discovery, and paranoia. Sadly, this new bold direction didn't quite land with critics and audiences at the time, leading to the album's underperformance. This caused Kylie to temporarily consider leaving the music industry for good, though she'd end up switching labels to Parlophone, where she released 2000's Light Years, which was widely deemed as a comeback record, and has gone on to become one of her most beloved and successful albums to date. Kylie has gone on to state that she'd never do a record as personal as Impossible Princess ever again. When asked about people's responses to her 2007 album, X, and why some fans and critics commented on its lack of personal songwriting despite coming out after her battle with breast cancer, she said she didn't think people wanted to hear a second Impossible Princess. With the exception of a few songs and her 2018 album Golden, Kylie largely steered away from deeply personal tracks for the remainder of her career, showing the impact this era had on her creative process moving forward. Impossible Princess was an important moment in Kylie's career. Without it, she may have never course-corrected into becoming the campy dance floor diva we know her as today. However, even though I love the album, I can't imagine she has particularly fond memories of this era, considering the backlash she received at the time. This is probably one that she does want to get out of her head. Mariah Carey, Glitter. Let's end this list off on a story with a happy ending. Mariah Carey's 2001 film and its accompanying soundtrack album, Glitter, are often seen as the low point of her career. Not necessarily because of the album itself being bad, but because of external factors in her life that made it a tumultuous time. In the mid to late 90s, Mariah was on top of the world professionally, racking up hit after hit, though her personal life wasn't all rainbows and butterflies. In 1997, she separated from her controlling ex-husband Tommy Mottola, who also happened to be the head of her label, Sony Music. The tension caused by the two working for the same company led to Virgin Records paying $20 million to Sony to let her out of her contract early, as well as signing Mariah to the label in an $80 million deal. Despite being away from her ex, Mariah still wasn't in a great headspace at the time, suffering from exhaustion that came from over a decade of non-stop work. Things came to a breaking point in 2001 when she suffered from an emotional breakdown, which was heavily publicized by media outlets. As a result, she couldn't promote Glitter, both the soundtrack and the film, as much as it could have been, though it really doesn't seem like that would have helped much, as the film tanked critically and commercially. The soundtrack was a victim of unfortunate circumstances. It wasn't totally ravaged by critics, but it did receive the weakest reviews in her career up to that point, and had the worst first week sales of her career. This poor performance led to her being dropped by Virgin just a few months after being signed. She ended up signing with Island Records, where she'd eventually released The Emancipation of Mimi, which has been deemed her comeback album. For a long time, Glitter was pretty much a punchline, especially online, though most of the criticism was directed towards the movie, which many have called a convoluted vanity project. The film's poor reputation pretty much overshadowed the album itself, Whenever people brought up Glitter, it was mostly referring to the film, but it seemed like no one really gave the album a chance. Mariah remained fairly tight-lipped on Glitter for over a decade, understandably so, as it was a rough time in her life. However, the album started to develop a cult fan base who saw it as a genuinely great throwback to 80s disco, dance, and R&B. The love for Glitter caused it to be the subject of an online fan campaign called #JusticeForGlitter in November 2018. Fans sent the album to #1 on iTunes, which Mariah was extremely thankful for, even including a whole section dedicated to Glitter in her Caution World Tour in 2019. She opened up more about Glitter and the love her fans had for it in her 2020 memoir, saying that she still loved the soundtrack and was happy it gained new life. I actually went to the Caution Tour, and I have to say it was really heartwarming to see her performing Glitter tracks. It reminded me of when Christina Aguilera did the same thing for her album Bionic. Both were panned at the time of their releases, but they went on to become fan favorites that their artists got to see vindicated years later. In all honesty, I do actually think Glitter is one of Mimi's weaker albums, but that's only because it's Mariah, and the bar for all of her discography is insanely high. Glitter is still a really good album, and was genuinely ahead of its time as one of the earliest 80s throwback records, a sound that would explode in popularity in the following decades, with plenty of current artists still incorporating that style. It may not have sparkled in the moment, but Glitter eventually found its shine.